The board voted you're out. My wife smirked. My boyfriend is the new CEO now. I smiled. Check page 391 of the contract. They had no idea what was coming. The moment my wife, Isabel, smirked across the mahogany conference table, I knew. I had been expecting it for weeks, maybe even months, ever since the whisper started. The stolen glances between board members, the sudden closed-door meetings that didn't concern me. My instincts had screamed at me to prepare for the inevitable, and yet watching it unfold, I still felt the gut punch of betrayal. The board voted, you're out. The words left her lips with the smoothness of someone delivering a well-rehearsed performance. She leaned back in her chair, her perfectly manicured fingers lacing together as if she had just won a chess match, and perhaps, in her mind, she had the once devoted wife, now the conqueror. Across the table, I saw Ryan, my former executive, sitting smugly at her side. His navy blue suit was crisp, his tie slightly loosened, just enough to make him appear at ease, yet in control. I had mentored that man, groomed him for leadership. I had shaken his hand on his first day, told him the company would reward hard work and loyalty, and here he was sitting in the seat that should have been mine. Correction. The seat they thought would be his. I'm sorry, Lucas, Isabel continued, though she didn't look sorry at all. This is business, not personal. Business. That was rich considering she had just declared that her boyfriend, the man she had secretly been seeing while still legally married to me, was now the CEO of the company I built from the ground up. I stayed seated. My posture relaxed despite the tension crackling through the room. I refused to give her the satisfaction of an outburst, the desperate pleading she was expecting. Instead, I let a faint smile play at my lips and flipped open the leather portfolio in front of me. Check page 391. I said smoothly, my voice calm, controlled. I heard the subtle shifting in their seats, the nervousness of the board members who had aligned with her. Isabel's smirk faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly, lifting her chin. What's on page 391? She demanded. I let the silence stretch, dragging the tension tighter, making them feel the weight of the mistake they had just made. Across the table, Matthew, my chief legal counsel and the only man in the room who had remained loyal, met my gaze with the barest flicker of amusement. He knew. He had known for weeks. The succession clause, I said finally, enunciating each word deliberately. It requires any incoming CEO to have at least 10 years of executive leadership experience in a technology firm. I tilted my head slightly, feigning curiosity. Ryan, how long have you been in senior management? Ryan's confidence wavered. 3 years, he admitted, his voice quieter than before. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. Well, that's unfortunate. I watched as the realization sank in like water filling a sinking ship. This is just a technicality, Isabel snapped. The board has the power to amend the clause. Matthew cleared his throat. Actually, we can't. Her head snapped toward him. That clause was written into the company's founding documents. He continued, his tone almost casual. It would require a 100% shareholder vote to modify. My smile widened just slightly. As the majority shareholder, I said, I'm not voting for that change. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly looking less like a confident CEO and more like a man who just realized he had gambled everything and lost. Isabel, however, wasn't one to back down easily. We'll fight this, she said, jaw tightening. The board has already made its decision, and we can take this to court if we have to. I shrugged. You're welcome to try. But let me remind you, this clause isn't something I threw in at the last minute. It's ironclad. Her nails tapped against the table, her mind spinning, looking for an escape route. Ryan finally spoke, attempting to regain some ground. We can find a workaround, he said, forcing a chuckle. This doesn't change the fact that the board believes new leadership is necessary. I turned to the board members, the very same people I had personally hired, the ones who had once pledged their loyalty to me. New leadership, I echoed as if tasting the words. That's interesting considering I've doubled this company's valuation in the last 5 years. A few of them looked away. Guilty. Weak. You know, I continued, letting my gaze move deliberately across the room. I had my suspicions about certain meetings happening behind my back. So I did my own investigating. Ryan tensed. Isabel's lips pressed into a thin line. I have copies of every private email, text exchange, and financial proposal that led up to this little coup. I paused, then added, I also have a few rather interesting discrepancies in the company's expense reports. Matthew slid a folder across the table. Would you like to explain, I asked, tapping the cover, why over $300,000 was funneled through a private consulting firm that just so happens to be registered under your name, Ryan? Ryan went pale. Isabel's face darkened. She started, but I held up a hand. You see, I've been patient, I said. My voice lower now, more measured. I watched. I waited. I let you dig your own graves. I glanced at the board again. I'm willing to let this slide for those of you who were merely misled into voting against me. My gaze flicked to Ryan and Isabel. But for those who actively participated in an attempted corporate takeover through fraud, I'm afraid there will be consequences. More silence. Matthew leaned forward, his voice polite but firm. There's still time for those who wish to distance themselves from this unfortunate situation. 3 board members immediately pushed back their chairs. I resign, one of them muttered. So do I, another echoed. Isabel's face twisted in rage as she realized what was happening. Sit down, she hissed. You're all cowards. No, I interrupted, standing up slowly. They're just smart enough to know when they've lost. I adjusted my cufflinks and turned to my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, if things went the way I intended. No, Isabel, I said quietly, savoring the moment. This isn't over. Her eyes burned with hatred. No, Lucas, she spat, voice shaking with fury. It's just beginning. She stormed out of the room, Ryan scrambling after her. The remaining board members looked anywhere but at me. The weight of their guilt pressed down on them. I let them stew in their discomfort before finally breaking the silence. Now, I said, pressing my palms flat against the cool mahogany table, let's discuss why a special board meeting was called without notifying the CEO. 1 hour later, 3 more board members had resigned. I accepted their departures with a gracious nod while Matthew quietly set their replacements in motion. The second I stepped back into my office, I finally let the weight of what had just happened settle onto my shoulders. My wife had betrayed me. My own wife had tried to steal the company I had spent my life building. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at the skyline. A soft knock at the door. Matthew entered, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Thought you might need this, he said. I took it grateful. How long have you known? 3 weeks, he admitted. Isabel asked me to review succession procedures. She didn't realize I helped write them. I nodded. Of course, she hadn't. She had always underestimated me. My phone buzzed. A text. Isabel, you may have won this round, but don't get too comfortable. There's more than one way to take control of a company. I showed it to Matthew. Would you like me to start documenting everything? He asked. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Please. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat in my office. The lights dimmed, the city skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. A glass of scotch rested on my desk untouched. The adrenaline from the coup had faded, but something colder had settled in its place. Resolve. They thought they had won. Isabel and Ryan, smug in their arrogance, believed they had me cornered. They had played their cards, expecting me to fold, not realizing I had been stacking the deck long before they even entered the game. I leaned back in my chair staring at the ceiling. I had built Carter Innovations from nothing. Every late night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had led to a company that now stood as an empire, a billion-dollar powerhouse. And my wife had tried to rip it from me, but I wasn't a fool. I had seen the signs. Months ago, whispers had started among the senior staff. Conversations would end the moment I stepped into a room. Isabel, who had once rolled her eyes at my passion for the company, had suddenly taken a deep interest in board meetings, financials, and executive strategy. And Ryan, Ryan, the man I had once mentored, whom I had given a shot when no one else would, he had spent the last year circling Isabel like a vulture. They thought they were being subtle, but I had seen it coming from miles away. So I did what any man in my position would do. I prepared for war. Isabel's voice still echoed in my head from the boardroom. We'll fight this. They had no idea how deep the trap went. It had started with small strategic moves. I rewrote the company's succession clause buried in the legal documents that no one ever bothered to read. Page 391, tucked away like an insurance policy. The clause required 10 years of executive leadership experience in a technology firm, something Ryan, with his pathetic 3 years, did not have. I had put that in place years ago after watching a friend lose his startup to a board coup. I swore that no one would ever take Carter Innovations from me without earning it. And now my own wife had walked straight into it. The best part, I hadn't even needed to lift a finger. The moment I revealed the clause, the board started turning on itself. The cracks began to show. Those who had aligned with Isabel and Ryan because they thought I was out of the picture suddenly realized their mistake. Ryan wasn't eligible, and that meant they had backed the wrong horse. I had sat there watching the panic set in, knowing exactly what would happen next. By the time I left the boardroom, 3 members had already resigned, their tails between their legs. The others? They stayed, but they weren't standing with Isabel anymore. They were standing with whoever could still hold power, and that was me. Back in my office, Matthew was waiting, flipping through a stack of papers. Well, he said, smirking. That went exactly as planned. I sank into my chair. Better. He tossed a document onto my desk. The resignation letters. Signed, official. We already have replacements lined up. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Good. The fewer loose ends, the better. Matthew sat down across from me, tapping the edge of the folder. Now, the real question is, how far do you want to take this? I already knew the answer. As far as necessary, I said. He nodded. Then we need to talk about the next move. While I had spent months laying my own groundwork, Isabel and Ryan hadn't been careful. They have been sloppy, arrogant, convinced that I would never see it coming. What they didn't realize was that I had been watching them the entire time. Matthew opened another folder and slid it toward me. You're going to like this. Inside were financial records. Transactions that shouldn't have existed. Ryan had been funneling money into a private consulting firm, one that was registered under his own name. Over $300,000 had been siphoned out of Carter Innovations' marketing budget into Ryan's personal accounts. Fraud. I let out a slow, humorless laugh. Of course, he was. Matthew leaned forward, but that's not the best part. I raised an eyebrow. There's more. Oh, yeah. He flipped the page. It wasn't just Ryan. I felt my pulse slow as I scanned the document. Isabel's signature was on the transactions. She had approved the payments. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the evidence. She had played the role of the power-hungry wife, the woman who just wanted to save the company from my so-called stubborn leadership. But in reality, she had been stealing from me the entire time. And that changed everything. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the skyline. We release this. Matthew nodded. To the board. To the board. To the SEC. To everyone. This wasn't just about taking back control anymore. This was about destroying them. Isabel and Ryan had tried to ruin me, to rip my legacy out from under me, and they had done it while committing financial fraud? No. They weren't walking away from this. I turned to Matthew. I want every department audited, every expense report, every transaction, every meeting they took without my approval. His smirk widened. Already on it. My phone buzzed. A text from Isabel. You may have won this round, but don't get too comfortable. There's more than one way to take control of a company. I exhaled slowly, then handed my phone to Matthew. Start documenting everything. His expression turned sharp. This is war then. I stood walking to the window. It was always war. I had spent my entire life building Carter Innovations. Now, I was going to tear them apart piece by piece, move by move. The best part? I didn't even need to lift a finger. They had already destroyed themselves. All I had to do was let it play out. As the city lights flickered below me, I realized something. This wasn't just about a corporate coup. This was personal, and I was about to end them both. I barely had time to let the weight of what had just happened settle before the next phase of this war began. The moment Isabel stormed out of the boardroom, her heels clicking against the polished floor, the rest of the board members sat in tense silence. Some looked anywhere but at me, guilt etched across their faces. Others shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing they had placed their bets on the wrong horse. I let them stew in it. Finally, I stood pressing my palms flat against the mahogany table. My voice was calm, deliberate. Now, I said, surveying them one by one, let's discuss why a special board meeting was called without notifying the CEO. A few cleared their throats, feigning surprise, but no one spoke. I exhaled slowly. No excuses, gentlemen. You all knew exactly what you were doing. A beat of silence. Then one of them, Gregory Tanner, the CFO, shifted forward in his chair. He had been on the fence from the start, I could tell. He was one of those spineless executives who moved wherever the tide took him. Lucas, he started, his voice laced with false diplomacy. There were concerns about I cut him off with a slight raise of my hand. About what, Gregory? My focus on R&D? My refusal to take the company public? His mouth opened and closed. He had nothing to say because they all knew the truth. Carter Innovations had never been stronger. We were growing, thriving, but I had refused to rush us into a reckless expansion that would dilute our brand. That was my real crime, being cautious instead of reckless. And Isabel had used it to turn the board against me. I walked around the table, my presence looming over them. I understand concerns. What I don't understand, I said, pausing behind Richard Gale, another board member who had sided with Isabel, is why no one brought them to me directly. No one spoke. I leaned down slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make them uneasy because this wasn't about company concerns, was it? This was about a power grab. Gil swallowed hard. I straightened and turned back to Matthew, my legal counsel, who had been sitting quietly through all of this. Have the resignation letters been prepared? I asked him. Matthew smiled slightly, opening a folder. They're right here. I slid them across the table. If you voted against me today, I said, you have two options: resign voluntarily or expect a thorough audit of your past financials. The threat was subtle but clear. Within minutes, 3 more board members resigned. The ones who remained, they knew they had no choice but to fall in line. By the time I stepped back into my office, Matthew was already making the necessary arrangements to replace the board members who had fled. I sank into my chair, finally allowing myself a moment to process. My own wife had tried to stage a coup against me. She hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She had betrayed everything I had built, and she had done it with another man sitting beside her thinking she could strip me of my life's work as if I was disposable. The sheer audacity of it made my hands tighten into fists. A knock on my door. Matthew stepped in holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said. I took it, nodding my thanks. "How bad is the damage?" He sighed, taking a seat. "Well, the good news is, with the board purge, we can get things back under control quickly. The bad news." He glanced at his phone. "Isabel is already moving to retaliate." I raised an eyebrow. That was fast. "She's already working on rallying internal support," Matthew said, sliding his phone across the desk. "She just sent out an email to the entire company. Subject line, important company updates and strategic vision discussion." I picked up the phone and scanned the message. "To all Carter Innovations employees, effective immediately, we are entering a new era of leadership and innovation. Transparency, progress, and bold decision-making will be at the forefront of our strategy. We will not be held back by outdated leadership models. An all-hands meeting will be held tomorrow to discuss the future direction of the company." It was perfectly worded to imply that I was the problem, that I was holding the company back, that she was the future. I smirked and handed the phone back. "Cancel the meeting." Matthew didn't even blink. "Already did." I nodded. "Also, revoke all her administrative access. I don't want her sending anything to the company without my approval." "Done." A beat of silence. Then Matthew asked, "Should we be worried?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, then exhaled. "Not for the company, but things are about to get messy." By the time I got home that night, my phone had already buzzed twice with new messages from Isabel. The first one was simple. "You're pathetic." The second, "If you think this is over, you're dead wrong." I ignored them both. Instead, I poured myself a drink, sat down on the couch, and let the tension in my muscles ease. But I knew better than to think it was over. Isabel wasn't just angry. She was humiliated. She had staked everything on taking me down, and instead, she had walked out of that boardroom powerless. She would never let that stand. I had barely finished my drink when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text from Isabel. It was from my father. "Call me now." I let out a slow breath, already knowing what was coming. The family intervention. The second I stepped inside my parents' house later that night, I knew Isabel had gotten to them first. My mother was perched anxiously on the edge of the sofa. My father was pacing near the fireplace, his face unreadable. I barely had time to set my briefcase down before my mother stood, her voice tight. "Lucas," she began. "What is this about you blocking Isabel from advancing in the company?" I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. That was an interesting way to describe what had happened. I turned to my father. "Let me guess. She told you I'm trying to stifle progress? That I'm afraid of change? She told us you blindsided her?" My father said, folding his arms, "that you manipulated the board to push her out." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "So she conveniently left out the part where she orchestrated a backroom deal to steal the company out from under me." My mother frowned. "Lucas, it's not that simple." I cut her off. "Actually, it is." I walked over to the fireplace, leaning against the mantel. "Isabel and her boyfriend, because let's not forget that detail, staged a coup. They manipulated board members into an illegal vote to force me out." My father's brow furrowed. "Illegal?" "Illegal," I confirmed. "Not only that, but Ryan isn't even qualified to be CEO. He doesn't meet the requirements." Silence. Then my mother whispered, "She just wants to help." I shook my head slowly. "No. She wants power." By the time I left my parents' house, I knew exactly what was coming next. Isabel had played the victim card. She was rallying support, planting seeds of doubt in the people closest to me. But she had underestimated one thing. I didn't just play defense. I played to win. That night, I pulled out my laptop and composed an email to Matthew. Need every expense report from Isabel's department. Every failed project. Every reckless decision. I hit send. If Isabel wanted a war, she was about to get one. I arrived at Carter Innovations early the next morning, but I already knew that I wasn't the first one in the building. The tension in the air was palpable. The employees sensed something was off. Whispers followed me as I walked through the halls. People tried not to make eye contact. They had seen the emails. They had heard the rumors. Isabel had been busy overnight, spinning her own version of the story. She wasn't just playing defense, she was going on the offensive. I stepped into my office and shut the door, taking a deep breath. Matthew was already there, waiting for me. Laptop open. A thick folder resting on the desk between us. "She's moving fast," he said without looking up. "Of course, she is," I muttered. "She knows she's running out of time." I sat down and opened the folder. Inside were pages of financial records, emails, and meeting transcripts. Evidence. "Tell me what I'm looking at," I said, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Matthew leaned forward. "It's worse than we thought. Isabel and Ryan weren't just orchestrating a coup, they were stealing." I didn't react immediately. I had already suspected as much, but seeing it in black and white made it real. "How much?" I asked. "Just over $300,000 in unauthorized transfers," he said. "All funneled through that consulting firm Ryan set up." I exhaled slowly, my fingers tapping against the desk. And Matthew hesitated. "There's more," he admitted. "Isabel had full knowledge of these transactions. She signed off on them." For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt something close to genuine shock. I had known she was ruthless, manipulative, calculating, but stealing from the company? She had taken it further than I had anticipated. "She really thought she'd get away with this," I said. Almost to myself. Matthew nodded grimly. "She wasn't thinking long-term. She was betting everything on a fast takeover. She needed Ryan in place before anyone could dig too deep." I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I had been prepared for a corporate betrayal, but this was fraud. A sharp knock on the door broke my thoughts. Maria, my executive assistant, poked her head in. "Lucas, I think you need to see this." She handed me her tablet, the screen already open to an email. "From Isabel Carter to Carter Innovations, all employees. Subject, transparency and leadership moving forward." I didn't even need to read the whole thing to know what it was. She was doing damage control. She had crafted a careful narrative, painting me as a dictator unwilling to evolve. Someone who refused to listen to fresh ideas and had to be forcibly removed for the good of the company. It was masterful, really. She wasn't denying what had happened. She was reframing it. "She's smart," I muttered, handing the tablet back. Matthew snorted. "She's desperate." I nodded toward the folder on my desk. "It's time we show everyone exactly who they're dealing with." Matthew smirked. "Let me handle it." The first public strike. By noon, the entire company knew the truth. I had leaked everything. The fraudulent transactions, the secret consulting firm, Isabel's direct involvement. It wasn't just an internal memo. It was public. Investors, employees, even clients, everyone saw it. And just like that, Isabel's carefully crafted narrative collapsed. It wasn't about a difference in leadership styles anymore. It was about corruption. I should have expected that she wouldn't go down quietly. At exactly 3:47 p.m., security alerted me that Isabel was in the building. I sighed, standing up. "Of course, she is." Matthew cracked his knuckles. "Want me to handle it?" I shook my head. "No. Let's hear what she has to say." I left my office and found her waiting for me in the executive lounge. She looked different. The usual poor